Senator Blunt, how are you this morning?
I'm good, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and we appreciate the time. Hey, let's jump in on the floods. What's the latest that you've seen, and what are we expecting in the next couple months?
Well, we expect the next couple of months to be flood stage pretty much up and down the Missouri River. I think they're thinking at the St. Louis end of the river until sometime in early September, they're going to see at least some level of what we'd consider flood stage, and obviously I believe everybody thinks that gets at the highest level it's going to get and then begins to drift down again, but not so soon that we won't have lots of agricultural impact along the river and possibly other kinds of impact as well. But I think the bottom line here is that with flooding from Montana all the way to St. Louis, that it's really time to look at the Missouri River Management Plan and see if that plan makes sense. Many of us, Senator Bond and I and Congressman Graves, were very involved in this debate 10 years ago when we said this plan would more often than not guarantee a flood every spring. They're holding too much water upriver, and I think now, with floods in every state, with my new colleague in the Senate from North Dakota, the former Governor Hoeven, now Senator Hoeven, out of his own personal home for about 6 weeks now, there's a willingness to look at this from the downriver, what's always been the downriver perspective, the flood perspective, and see what we need to be doing to meet the number one priority of river management, which should be flood control.
Yes.
Followed by navigation and other things, but the number one priority is flood control.
Senator Blunt, couldn't agree with you more, and it all started about 30 years ago as we moved more towards this environmentalist movement. Joe Herring in the American Thinker wrote a great piece about this, where they were starting to say we got to get this back to a natural pre-dam state of the river and have these spring pulse releases, and as you mentioned, it really sets you up for year after year flood. Greg Pavelka, I wanted to get your response to this. This is the wildlife biologist with the Corps of Engineers in Yankton, South Dakota. Here's what he told the Seattle Times. This event will leave the river in a much more natural state than it's seen in decades. He said this is a prolonged headache for small towns and farmers along its path, but a boon for endangered species. The former function of the river is being restored in this one-year event. In the short term, it could be detrimental, but in the long term, it could be very beneficial. It sounds like there are some people at the Corps, like Greg Pavelka, Senator Blunt, who think that's more important than people's homes, livelihoods, farms, and everything else.
Well, I'm going to be complaining about those comments. I think the Corps generally has done a good job managing the plan they have. They just don't have a very good plan. But this particular attitude, apparently prevalent somewhere in the Corps, but really prevalent in the extreme environmental community, is that we ought to just let the river do whatever it wants to do.
Right.
And that is a pre-civilized view of water management. People manage the river. The river, if left to its own, will do whatever it wants to do, but that doesn't encourage river transportation. It doesn't encourage the right kind of agriculture or community development along the river, and that's like we have one of the reasons we have all these wildfires is that they want the forest to go back to its pre-managed state, and so you have all this dead timber laying all over the ground, and once a fire starts, it is just fueled in an unbelievable way. We need river management. We need forest management. Those are the best things for the environment, and not letting the environment do whatever it wants, whatever nature wants it to do.
Yeah, and Senator Blunt, especially when we set this all up some 60 years ago, and it was working great. You know, the government encouraged people to move in and farm and live there and set up businesses and everything else, and you can't leave them hanging in the wind. You know, you mentioned the master manual. There's one part of this master manual that's pointed out to me. Section 7 said this. They admit they embrace the risk of flooding for these new priorities, as you're mentioning, that we got to reprioritize. Here's what it says in the manual. Releases at higher than normal rates early in the season that cannot be supported by runoff forecasting techniques is inconsistent with all system purposes other than flood control. All of the other authorized purposes depend upon the accumulation of water in the system rather than the availability of vacant storage space. So what they're saying in the manual is, sure, we could release more and have more vacant storage space, but that's counter to all the purposes except flood control. So it sure looks like they're minimizing what you and I agree should be the number one priority.
Well, it does, and this is not, people listening to you and I talking about this shouldn't think that, well, how did this happen? Were those guys not paying any attention? This was a huge debate 10 years ago, and we lost the debate. I mean, we had hearings in St. Joseph. I mentioned the three people are still in the Congress that are most involved in that at the time. And we didn't, I don't think we lost the debate. I said that wrong. We lost the fight. We lost the final vote, and our friends on the north part of the river who hadn't experienced flooding in a long time in any significant way, all, I hope, have a new respect for what the disaster that flooding can create. And, Senator McCaskill and I don't agree on a whole lot of things legislatively or governmentally, but we're working together with the two senators from North Dakota, Senator Cochran and Senator Hoeven, to organize a Missouri River working group. We're going to have the first meeting of all the senators along the river next week to talk about what we really need to be doing in this plan. And we don't want to open the plan for another 14 years of study, but what do we know now that maybe was a different set of facts than was available in 2004 that will allow us to do what's necessary to revise that plan so that you do meet the number one priority of river management is supposed to be, by every standard, except the extreme environmental standard, flood control. I
love what you're saying, Senator Blunt. You know what I'm concerned about is that some of these environmental groups will use the EPA's laws and regulations to sue over any changes you and your fellow senators try to make and tie it up, as you mentioned, for another 14 years or so. How do you stop that from going on?
Well, that's a good point, and how do you stop that from happening? And that's why judges are so important. That's why these judges that are appointed for life by the President of the United States need to have a high level of scrutiny, and we need to be thoughtful about what, obviously, who we're putting on the federal bench to make those ultimate decisions.
Exactly.
But I do think the opportunity here is that everybody involved, every state involved, now has reason to be concerned about the flooding, and that was not the case in the late 90s and the early parts of 2000 when this debate was raging, and there were many hard feelings over this debate in Washington as well as among people along the river. This was not something that was happening and nobody knew it was happening. Everybody knew it was happening. We said over and over again that this idea of a spring rise will more times than you would want it to guarantee a spring flood. And you read the section where the spring rise is a good thing according to the plan. Well, it doesn't look like it's such a good idea this year, and we need to do something about it. In 1993, the biggest flooding until now on the Missouri, and I believe in history, in the history of recorded history, it all was basically about Missouri south of the Grafton Dam area. It was the navigable part of the river south of Sioux City, and so we were the ones concerned about flooding. They were the ones concerned about everything else in the plan.
Right.
And hopefully we'll have more help this time as we talk about the devastation that floods can create.
Right. Senator Roy Blunt with me here on the KCMO Morning Show, and let's shift gears a little bit. I know you got to run soon, and I want to get in this talk on the debt. President Obama is now saying raising taxes is really just cutting spending in the tax code. You got Harry Reid claiming you guys just want to give away money to millionaires and billionaires. Chuck Schumer saying you're doing a slash and burn philosophy here on the debt, on saying just cut spending. So they're accusing you of, all this is for millionaires and billionaires. How do you Republicans get out your message that, hey, it's a spending problem and we don't want to raise anybody's taxes?
Well, that's exactly right. And, if the president would have wanted to raise taxes for 2 years, the first 2 years of his presidency, he had huge majorities in the House. Even in December of last year, there were still 59 Democrats in the Senate, and he couldn't, and they didn't raise taxes because at the end of the day, everybody knows that raising taxes is going to hurt this economic recovery. The regulations, the utility rate discussions, the constant tax discussions hurt it enough already, but if you actually wind up raising taxes, you're sending exactly the wrong message. And the president could have done this if he'd wanted to. Their majorities could have done this if they wanted to. I believe it's not going to happen, but if it does happen, I'm not going to vote for it. It is the wrong way to go. We need to get the spending under control. And you and I both know the problem is not that the federal government doesn't tax enough. The problem is the federal government spends too much.
Senator Blunt, one of the things that more people are getting upset about, too, is that all these talks on the debt ceiling seem to be happening behind closed doors. We just get little bits of information. I'm sure a lot of your fellow senators and fellow congressmen feel the same way, that they're afraid that at the last second this deal is just going to be sprung that came up from Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and Biden and Obama, and all of a sudden you guys are going to have to vote on it in 2 days. Why isn't this being debated more publicly?
Well, I don't know. I think the idea that we're actually here this week instead of being on the Missouri River looking at what's happening there and other places around the country the senators would have been on this normal week that we work in the district is all just political show on the president's part. Frankly, at the end of the day, that agreement is going to be negotiated by a handful of people. But I think where I agree with you is that there's no reason for it to be negotiated and then not have time to carefully analyze it and know exactly what the negotiation meant before you vote on it. I think this has been badly handled by the president, who doesn't seem to recognize the reality that tax cuts are not going to be part of this deal. Tax increases are not going to be part of this deal. I'm ready to vote to raise the debt limit. I don't like the idea of having to do it, but I'm ready to do it if we have real structural change that indicates that we're not going to continue to do more of what we've been doing. And the only thing worse, in my opinion, than not raising the debt limit in the short term is raising the debt limit and not changing behavior. We have to do things differently than we're doing them. And this whole new idea of, what do they call them, tax expenditures?
Yes.
Things in the tax code that encourage business depreciation so that you encourage business to go out and buy something quicker than they otherwise might and get the economy going. This whole idea, these are tax expenditures. We have a high enough tax rate, and it shouldn't be part of this discussion.
Senator Roy Blunt, we always appreciate the time. We wish you back soon. Have a good one.
Great to talk to you.